said earlier, when you say don't forget, for those who weren't alive at the time, it's like a message to tell them, hey, don't forget this. But for those who were living, you will not forget that, because you will remember for sure where you were.
And it does seem like everybody has some sort of connection of knowing somebody who unfortunately passed that day in New York. And of course, if you were in New York, you know, you obviously remember the horrific things that happened. Larry Sprinkle, you were here at the time. You were on the air. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Richard was saying that we talk about cut-ins. That's the segment where you go from the Today Show to local.
Right.
So we're sitting, you know, getting ready for the cut-in. It runs about 8:56. So watching the Today Show, I'll never forget, Matt Lauer was interviewing a guy who'd written a book about Howard Hughes. The interview was going on, and then he said there was an interruption. He said, we've gotten reports of something is the freight center. There's a fire. Something's happened, and they did a break, and they came back, and they had a picture of the smoke coming out. They said, well, we understand a plane hit it. So that was at 8:46 it hit. It was about 8:52, 8:53. They went on the air, and then from that point on, it stayed and it didn't come back to us. But I mean, just the vivid memories of that, of just seeing that enormity of that moment.
For sure.
When no one really knew what had happened. I mean, some of the first reports came out, a small plane hit. Because if you're standing on the ground looking up, that is such a huge building, 110 stories. The plane looked small going into it.
Right.
Yeah.
And the one thing I remember from that day is that if you knew someone in New York, like the phones were down, and so you weren't able to get in touch with the people who you know and love, and that was just creating anxiety for so many people, because you didn't know, you know, just the effects of this. Like it was horrible trying to get in contact.
I mean, we all were just devastated by it, and no one left watching that television for you know, we were straight with the network all the way through the next day, and then beyond that as well. But I mean, the moment itself was just something it's speechless. It left you speechless. And to think that they said, well, Larry, we're not going to have local. We're going to stay with the Today Show, and then to sit there and watch that. And then at 9:02 to watch that second plane. I remember I was in our newsroom back here standing looking at a big screen, big monitor we call it. And then to see that plane hit, and one of our producers, I have never heard someone scream so loud when that plane hit. It just, I mean, it was such a sad moment in the history of this country. That's why it's a day of remembrance. And, you know, looking back to all those people who lost their lives, almost 3,000 people to think about that.
And then we can't forget about Pennsylvania as well. I mean, many people, you know, there was the plane that went down.
And then the Pentagon.
And the Pentagon.
To see the tape of that plane going to the Pentagon. It was just one thing after another. And then the next day, not one plane was in the air.
Yeah,
I know.
When you drove, I remember driving to work, it was almost like, it was silence.
Yes.
Everyone was home. It was such an eerie feeling and such a sad moment in the history of this country. You know, everyone has some sort of remembrance, whether you were a little kid or whether you were an old guy like me.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Larry, thanks so much for joining us and adding that perspective.